New UFO info seems to confirm Bob Lazar's story. Joe brings on the legend Bob Lazar himself, the guy who's been telling the same story about working on alien craft at Area 51 since 1989, and he's never flipped.
It's crazy because you had this story way, way, way back then, and everybody's like, this guy's just making things up. This is all cockamamie bullshit. And then you see those videos from these fighter jets, and you're like, whoa, wait a minute. It's moving the exact same way he described. It's doing what he described in 1989.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning, Joe points out how recent UFO videos, the New York Times ones, go fast. FLIR match exactly what Bob Lazar described decades ago. The craft rotates, the belly rolls to face the direction it's going before it takes off. Joe says, it's exactly how you described all those years ago, which is really fucking crazy. Man, that gave me chills. I've been following this stuff for years, and when mainstream footage starts lining up with Lazar's story, it makes you wonder how much the government has been sitting on. Shout out to President Trump for ordering the release of more UFO files. Finally, someone in the White House is actually pushing for transparency instead of the usual deep state runaround.
Do I remember the thought?
Do you remember the experience?
Yeah, I remember the feeling.
Of recognize, because initially you saw the American flag sticker.
Yeah, when I saw the American flag, when I first went in, the first time I went in through the hangar door instead of around the back, slid my hand across it, saw the American flag, and I thought, oh my God, this explains the UFO nuts,
It's ours.
Yeah, this is ours. This is a new top secret fighter. We came up with a new propulsion system, and, it explains everything because I never believed in flying saucers. I thought people were nuts. But when they started reviewing everything with me, I was trying to replace somebody, or they were trying to use me to replace somebody as quick as possible.
Bob talks about seeing the American flag on the craft at first and thinking, oh my God, this explains the UFO nuts. This is ours. Then a colleague tells him straight up, no, this is alien technology, light years ahead of us. They were told to reverse engineer it at any cost, and even had ways to disable it remotely. The shock in his voice when he says, the world just changed, you can feel it. This isn't some tinfoil hat guy chasing lights in the sky. This is a scientist who went in skeptical and came out changed. Respect to Bob for sticking to his story all these years, even after the intimidation, the tampered cars, the surveillance. That takes guts.
They had two directives. Directive one was to duplicate the technology with available material at any cost, which is exact verbatim what it was. And directive two was to be able to disable this technology at a distance at any cost. And, once you start thinking about that, wait, don't you guys know how the thing you built worked? And it's kind of like they left that out, that this, by the way, this isn't ours. And Barry is the guy that filled me in going, no, this is an alien craft. And we need to figure out how this works. Look at the technology here. I mean, this is decades, light years ahead of where we are.
He describes the facility as this dusty old hangar in the desert, not some sterile lab. They were cutting amplifiers out of the craft like it was no big deal. Teams weren't even talking to each other. Metallurgists over here, propulsion guys over there. Classic government bureaucracy screwing up something this massive. Joe's reaction is perfect as always. He calls it a pretty detailed lie if it's fake, because most liars get bored and change their story. But Lazar, same details for 37 years. That's why I love Rogan's show. He actually lets people talk and asks the real questions without the corporate media filter. Joe nails it when he says if this is all a lie, It's one of the most detailed, consistent lies in history. Most fabricators slip up after a few years. Lazar, same story for nearly 40 years.
It was a shock, really, to me. I remember going home that night and just laying in bed and reviewing everything that everybody said that day. And I really don't remember how I felt the following days, but it was just a different feeling.
Like the world just changed.
Yeah. It was, I don't know. I really can't put it into words.
Well, I couldn't imagine. I couldn't imagine what that experience is like.
Toward the end, they touch on the intimidation Lazar faced cars being tampered with, surveillance, the whole "they're watching" vibe. Rogan asks the big question, why come forward if it's so risky? Lazar basically says the truth mattered more.
Right prior to I got there were Russians involved in it. You know, from what I can ascertain, there was an exchange of information, and then we discovered something of great importance. And of course, kicked the Russians out and just held on to that information ourselves. And there was kind of a knowledge vacuum there. There was also an accident, and I was told I was replacing someone that was injured. I believe he actually died.
There's no record of who this person was, or has anybody ever tried to figure it out?
I don't know. I don't have any names. I just know that Barry told me, I'm replacing somebody that he used to work with. And he was without a lab partner for a while. So when I came in there...
How long is a while?
I don't know. But, I mean, that brings up a good point. First of all, we're dealing with alien or another civilization technology, whether it it's from another dimension, another time, another planet. I mean, who really knows?
They get into the Russians, there was some info exchange, an accident happened, and suddenly there's a knowledge vacuum. Bob ended up replacing an injured or deceased worker. The project was already stalled, and this made it worse.
So I'll eventually get to answer the question here, but wouldn't you think this place would be more like the Lunar Receiving Lab, where everything is white, so you can see a speck of dust. Everything is sterile. People are being extremely careful with what they're doing, but you're not seeing that.
Here's where it gets really good. Bob explains the insane compartmentalization at the facility. Metallurgists over here, propulsion guys over there, nobody could talk to each other without written approvals. Science doesn't work like that. You need open collaboration to make breakthroughs. But the security people turned it into a bureaucratic nightmare. Rogan points out the irony. Their own secrecy rules are why they couldn't reverse engineer the tech faster. This is classic deep state incompetence. They hoard the most important discovery in human history and then tie their own hands with red tape.
Everything was compartmentalized. Like the metallurgists weren't talking to the propulsions people, who weren't talking to if there were biologics experts. Right. Like everybody was...
Super frustrating. Because I think, I don't remember exactly where that started. Again, it's 40 years ago. But I think it started with the seats. And no, it started with the actual skin of the craft, because everything looked like it was made from the same material. And I wanted some information about the skin, the superstructure of the craft. And they said, no, that's restricted. We need a reason for you to... I just want to see if everything is exactly the same material. And what I call the seats in the craft, I still don't know if they're the seats, but they might be. I think it'd be hilarious if they were actually something else. But I wanted some information on those, and that was restricted information too. There were other groups working on that. So they compartmentalized stuff so much. There was no exchange of information between any groups. I mean, you could submit a written response that your supervisor, in my case, Dennis, would have to carry over, and they would have to approve. And, you'd get a 2 or 3 line response from, the other group, but it's just that's not how science works. Science works on the free exchange of information.
Bob suspects the craft's skin was some kind of electric material with a permanent static field that interacted with the propulsion system, but he was completely denied access to that info. Rogan reacts with amazement at how self-defeating the whole setup was.
And they were just killing themselves with security, and it was really frustrating. It was terribly frustrating.
So was this a function of security people that are concentrated on top security that don't truly understand how collaborative science works?
Yeah, that's it right there. You can stop right there. They had no idea how that works.
Because it stands to reason that whatever that thing was made out of probably in some way interacts with the propulsion system and whatever controls that are in it, that this material has to be particularly unique.
Exactly. That's exactly my point.
Toward the end, they wrap up the frustration with how the security culture killed real progress. Joe keeps coming back to how consistent Bob's story has been for nearly 40 years. Most liars change details or get bored, but Bob never has. That consistency, plus the new footage lining up, makes this extremely hard to dismiss. The compartmentalization Bob described is the perfect example of why the system fails. Too many gatekeepers, not enough truth. Trump's approach of declassifying more UAP stuff could finally crack this open in 2026. Does this new corroborating footage finally prove Bob Lazar was telling the truth all along? Should Trump release everything, including any reverse-engineered tech details? Are we actually close to real disclosure this time? Or is the deep state still playing games behind the scenes?